Hi, good evening. This Gavach probably. Welcome to the latest installment of our winter series of the years 2020 to 2021. The name of our series, which I hope you know by now, the name of the winter series is Roller Coaster, the State of Israel and the Jews, the Jewish people, in the mid-1980s. Tonight is the 13th lecture, entitled The Age of Wiesel and Woke, the Holocaust and Western Culture in the mid-1980s. As always, I want to thank our series sponsor, the Lehmann family, this Lehmann lecture series, and our specific sponsor tonight. Once again, he sponsored 2 lectures in a row. Henry Rosenberg from New York. God bless him. I hope many will emulate him, and this enabling us to do this. All right. I also want to thank our tech team here. Utilate, my son's putting in an enormous amount of time. There will be some time in the near future when he'll be out of town for vacation, and we'll have to skip one. We'll be a little bit off schedule. So stay tuned, and I'll keep you tuned. But keep that in mind. I also want to thank Howard Elbaum for efficiently getting out the PowerPoint. I gave him a real task tonight with the editing in and out of certain parts, as you'll see. And finally, I want to thank Yossi Westin, who is, as always, going to do his superb magic and turn this into a final product for your viewing pleasure. Now, with any further ado, as I always say, let's get down to the body of my remarks. Tonight, as I said before, is the 13th lecture. This is 13 out of 16. We have 3 more to go after tonight. 3 more to go. Pretty soon, you're going to be having a boring Saturday night. This is the 13th one. It's called The Age of Wiesel and Woke, in which we talk about the Holocaust and Western culture in the mid-1980s. So let's get right into it. One of the most interesting cultural phenomena of our lifetimes has been the evolution of the Holocaust in Western culture. I'm not talking about Jewish culture. Obviously, if you're Jewish, especially if you're a religious Jew or a passionate Jew, of course, the Holocaust is a very important part of the culture, but plenty of not. But I'm talking about in Western culture in general. Notice when one says the Holocaust, you automatically mean the Jewish Holocaust, the genocide committed against the Jews. Now, they're not the only ones who suffered a Holocaust. If one surveys the past century, there have been quite a few genocides, as we all know, leaving millions slaughtered. I mean, just think, for example, of Ukraine in the time of Stalin, or Cambodia, or Rwanda more recently, other places around the world. It happens. In spite of this, in spite of the fact there's a multiplicity of Holocausts, the Jewish Holocaust has attained a unique status in world culture, or Western culture. This is a process that unfolded during the decades after 1945. Let me be clear about this. We've had a lot of tsaras in Jewish history. It's never been part of the non-Jewish culture. They don't know much about the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Khmelnytsky massacres, the pogroms in Russia, things like that. I mean, maybe it's a line or two in a book. It's not an important part of Western culture. It's a little piece. By contrast, what Hitler did attained a huge status, and perhaps even permanent status, in modern culture and postmodern culture. That's interesting. For the first time, a strictly Jewish experience entered into the mainstream of general culture. I don't know if you appreciate that. Now, this is a process that unfolded in the decades after 1945. It didn't happen right away. In my previous lectures over the years, over the past decade, I have chronicled the slow but steady development of the Holocaust as a constituent element of postmodern Western non-Jewish culture. Okay? I repeat, not just a Jewish thing. Of course it's a Jewish thing. It's part of European society. You know they have required readings on this in public school systems around the world, in universities and places like that. They've taken a Jewish experience and universalized it. It's very interesting. And today, the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, has iconic world status. It's almost de rigueur for world leaders to bow to it and pay obeisance to it. I mean, the most recent manifestation, what I'm talking about, is when the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, went not that long ago to Jerusalem to attend the Holocaust conference, many of us know, and spoke in real terms. I mean, he's a British member of the royal family. What does he care what happened to the Jews? And yet, He's a person of the 20th century, 21st century, and has entered into this psychology. Take a look at this.
Survivors of the Shoah, President Riflin, Your Majesties, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a particular honor, although one of the most solemn kind, to be present here today and on behalf of the United Kingdom to commemorate all those so tragically lost in the Shoah. To come to this sacred place, Yad Vashem, a memorial and a name, is to be faced with that for which no name, no words, and no language can ever possibly do justice. The magnitude of the genocide that was visited upon the Jewish people defies comprehension and can make those of us who live in the shadow of those indescribable events feel hopelessly inadequate. The scale of the evil was so great, the impact so profound, that it threatens to obscure the countless individual human stories of tragedy, loss, and suffering of which it was comprised.
And there's a longer speech, of course. This is status when you get the Prince of Wales to attend the Holocaust conference. Now, today we kind of take it for granted. It wouldn't have been taken for granted a generation or two ago. Now, closer to home, the Holocaust has become, or became, a constituent element of postmodern Jewish culture. This is interesting. The Holocaust has become a key element of Jewish culture. Now, all I can do is give you my opinion. I say that endlessly. And all I'm doing over here is telling you what I think. This is proven to be positive as well as negative. Positively, well, let's divide this between, shall we say, the frum and non-frum culture. In the frum culture, the Holocaust, in my lifetime and yours, has provided a powerful stimulus. There's an unspoken command almost. We shall defeat Hitler by rebuilding what he destroyed. Both on a personal level, that's why you've had such a baby boom in the Orthodox world since 1945. Very much at variance with modern Western culture. And at the institutional level, I've chronicled this in the past, the fanatical rebuilding of the Hasidic sects, which is now massive. Okay, that's not a bad thing; it's a good thing. The Hasidim repopulated themselves at an institutional level to rebuild, as I described a couple weeks ago, the yeshiva world, the Olamite yeshivas. Hitler wiped out Slobodka. Hitler shot Telz. Hitler destroyed Baranovich. Hitler did this, that, and the other. We will replace it, right? It'll never be as good as the original. We will replace it. This very powerful stimulus, actually, as I tried to explain the other day, actually has taken the Olam HaYeshivas to unprecedented level. They got more people now than they ever had back in Europe. I already spoke about that. But the image there is so powerful that at the time of the beginning of the State of Israel, when the Rosh Yeshivas, such as they were, went to Ben Gurion, they said they want a draft exemption for the Yeshiva Bachrim, they could appeal to a secularist like Ben Gurion and say, listen, we had an Olam HaYeshivas, Hitler snuffed it out. We have a tiny sheriff's plate to the left. We need to rebuild it now. And Ben Gurion, it was a secular guy, nevertheless came from Eastern Europe. He said, I hear the point. As we all know, getting the draft exemption. So it's interesting. Now, by the way, this is now 2021. In my opinion, I think this particular dynamic is running out of steam in the Orthodox world. Are my kids or grandchildren moved to their core by the Holocaust? I think it's a gap now. I don't see it. Okay? And this is how it is with all historical events. It has a splash on that people, maybe a generation later, 2 generations, 3 generations later, hard to stir the passion. So we'll see how it plays out in the 21st century. The Holocaust has also provided powerful justification for the need for a Jewish state. Put in the crudest terms, if you had a state of Israel in 1938 instead of 1948, when they had a Holocaust, the Jews have someplace to go. Now, hear what I just said. The Holocaust has proven a powerful justification for the need for a Jewish state, not for Zionism. As we all know, Obama just published his memoirs, and he basically said over there, Israel had to come into being for the Holocaust. Not because the Jewish people are entitled to a state of their own, which is why a lot of groups are angry at him. And if you just take a look at who Obama was, I think these are two beautiful pictures. Look at the difference, the pronounced difference in the body language with him and Elie Wiesel and him and Netanyahu. Right? It says it all. He's like cuddly, momish over there in the Oval Office. It's unbelievable. And then look at him and Obama. It's like two first graders that do not like each other. Now this, of course, this idea of Holocaust justifying Israel enrages the Arabs, the Muslims, and the anti-Israel left, who make the inane charge that Israel has illegitimately appropriated the Holocaust. Right? That's what they say. That the Zionists rode the Holocaust into the illegitimate thing of making a state. This is crazy. As I just said before, it's not some Zionist thing to say that had there been a Jewish state in the 1940s, there would have been a Holocaust, the Jews have somewhere to go. That's not a Zionist word. That's a fact. They do not want to come to terms with the fact that when there was no Jewish state, the world let the Jews all get killed and didn't care about it. That's the kind of argument they don't want to confront. Okay? In other words, the Holocaust does indeed justify the existence of a Jewish state, although a Zionist would say it was justified even before the Holocaust. A religious Jew would say it's been justified since the time of Abraham. But I'm just telling you how these dynamics work out. Hence, by the way, we have these wonderful oxymorons of the Middle East and the far right that you and I live with. The Holocaust didn't happen, and anyway, it should have finished all you guys off. We all saw, I don't know now, based on the internet, was it at the Capitol or somewhere else? But look at these T-shirts. 6MWE, 6 million was not enough, right? That's an interesting comment on the Holocaust. Now, by the way, I bet you if you got that guy, that mamzer, they'll say, it didn't even happen. You see? Now, to American Jewry at large, I would say non-Orthodox American Jewry, I would say you have a more complicated story. Certainly by the 80s. Instead of becoming a stimulant for the development of a vibrant non-Orthodox Jewish culture, it became the very culture itself in many instances. You know what I'm saying? The value of the Holocaust, as I see it, once it happened, was to stimulate Jews in the post-war period to intensify their Jewishness in whatever way. But as I've chronicled, not much of a vibrant Jewish culture emerged out of the non-from world in the post-war. It's not the world of the Hebrew schools and Talmud Torahs. It's the world of the vast wasteland, which so many Jews don't know anything about Hebrew, don't know anything about Judaism, and don't try. And so there, instead of cracking the Talmud or Martin Buber, whatever you want, A.J. Heschel, you see a Holocaust movie, read a Holocaust book. Attend a Holocaust memorial event. By the 1980s, Holocaust-related events, we have in Baltimore Kristallnacht, Holocaust-related events dominated American Jewish public culture. Holocaust-related college courses were the ones with the biggest Jewish enrollment. I have friends, I'll tell you. That's good and it's bad. I mean, it's good that Jews should learn about the Holocaust, yes. But that ain't what Judaism is about. It's one thing that happened to the Jews along the way. It's a terrible thing that happened to the Jews along the way. One thing, it's not Judaism. And instead, this became a period sort of personified in American Jewry like we have in Baltimore with memorials. Right? Here's the one downtown. This replaced the other one, which was really inane, over at not far from the Harbor Place. This is all not far from the Harbor Place. And a Holocaust memorial, especially in a part of town nobody goes to, it's a Geisha concept. What do I mean by that? Jews aren't the type to be inspired, I don't think, by statues here and there. They meant well, but it didn't play out. Because it coexisted with spiraling assimilation and intermarriage and moving out of Judaism, Jewishness, and so forth. This is the basic facts, demographic facts of our lifetime. But even thoughtful, non-frum intellectuals worried about turning the Holocaust into the center of Judaism and Jewish culture, which it isn't. I remember Arthur Herzberg used to talk like that. Again, the Holocaust is very important and people should know about it and so on and so forth. Absolutely. But it's a piece of Judaism. It's a piece of the painting. Know the painting. I think the most interesting transformation in American Jewry was in its attitudes. Because I'm talking about the attitudes of the survivors who came to this country, people like my parents. Because the status of the victims of the Holocaust living in Jewish communities changed over a generation. When my parents came over here, and when I was young, they were called the Greener, or refugees. They're refugees. That's in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. By the 70s, they're survivors. Different word, different valence, okay? The first term are negative terms. You're a greenhorn. You're a refugee. Loser. Second one, survivor. You're heroic. You're heroic. And this is something that happened during my lifetime. Now, yesterday was my father's yard site. And that's why when I was looking online for this, I happened to see something very interesting. I'll share with you for a second. My father was in Dachau at the end of the war, 3/4 dead. And when the war was over, what happened was they transferred the people out of Dachau once they did operations on them and medical resuscitation and things like that to Feldafing, which was not far away. That was a DP camp, displaced person camp. And look at this. Let's go to the next one. And son of a gun. Here's a friend of mine, Frank Abrahamson, he was telling me about this. His parents were there also in Feldafing. And here's Eisenhower visiting Feldafing. Isn't that cool? And they show him. Now, this is not a concentration camp. This is a displaced person camp. You understand? And Patton is there also, by the way. And they give him the whole business. That's Patton with the shiny helmet. You recognize him from the George Scott movie. And Patton hated Jews. But he's going along on this because it's a PR that's being photographed by everybody. Now, and my father was there. At least he told me he saw Eisenhower. And I didn't find him in the pictures. Maybe I should look with a fine tooth comb. And maybe some of you have relatives, for all I know, who were in Feldafing in 1945 and 1946. Many Jews were. There's a whole story in that. Namely, at the end of the war, the American army treated the DPs horribly through a whole bunch of snafus. And it was terrible. And a couple of GIs wrote home to their parents. And parents in New York City wrote to the congressman. And the congressman complained to Truman, and Truman complained to Eisenhower. And Eisenhower said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then changes were made. And now, in order to show he wasn't anti-Semitic, he made a tour of all the DP camps over here. And it's kind of interesting because he's going with this huge crowd, but he doesn't really need guards, does he? Because the DPs are not out to get Eisenhower. Anyway, let's proceed, right? Now, what I'm talking about in terms of the transformation of the Jews from refugees and greeners to survivors, in my opinion and in the opinion of many, reflects not something about the survivors, but about the American Jews who had a guilty conscience in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and didn't know, as is often the case, didn't want to deal with their guilty conscience. Here you see a picture of Raoul Hilberg, who became a very famous Holocaust historian, the first one, more or less, who wrote a comprehensive work on what happened in the Holocaust. These things were written in the 40s and 50s. People knew about it. They didn't know facts. And I just Googled it. And Raoul Hilberg is a German Jew, completely assimilated. And look at this. As early as 42, Hilberg, after reading, who was in this country, after reading scattered reports of what would later become known as the genocide. So, if you wanted to, you knew what was happening in Europe. He went so far as to call Stephen Samuel Wise, the famous Rabbi Wise, who was a self-proclaimed leader of American Jewry, and asked him, Rabbi Wise, what are you planning to do with regard to the complete annihilation of European Jewry? And Wise hung up the phone. As you see, Professor Mita recently wrote a book called The Jews Should Shut Up. The Jews Should Be Quiet. And it's a big indictment and great historical detail of Stephen Wise and Roosevelt, et cetera, et cetera. So, Stephen Wise was not the only one. American Jewry in general just said, let's just get the war over with. And whatever gets killed, gets killed. I mean, that's the dirty truth. And so the guilty Americans, when they saw the survivors who came out, called them refugees and greeners and things like that. But the children and the grandchildren of the American Jews by the 1970s, Vayakam Dar Chodesh Asher Lo Yodes, that's World War II. People who reached maturity in the 70s, they had nothing to be guilty about. They weren't adults in the 1940s. And they looked at these people and said, wow, they survived Hitler's hell. We should give them great respect. You understand? And the little old ladies who people used to look at with smirks, all of a sudden became people that they're invited to speak to public schools, and then to Holocaust memorials, and light the candles at the Kristallnacht, and so on and so forth. Now, being interviewed by TV, it's interesting. Now, did it take about 30 years, that's what I'm talking about, the 70s, to digest the reality and the philosophical consequence of the Holocaust? Because there are philosophical consequences of all this. What does it tell us about Western culture? Here we touch upon a universal theme. The belated, maturing reaction of the Western world to the fact of the Holocaust and to the of necessity coming to terms with it, including the uncomfortable questions in many places, especially in Europe. What did you do in the war, Daddy? Were you aware of the Holocaust? Did you give a darn? Did you participate in the killing? And, life in the internet world today, in 2021, is surreal whenever I do these lectures. We all know the controversial events at the Capitol last week. Now, of all people, B'chvodo B'yatzmo, Arnold Schwarzenegger came out in a whole video. I'm sure many have seen it, attacking Trump and so forth. But the part I'm interested in is Arnold Schwarzenegger is born, as you'll see in a second, in Austria right after the war, to parents who were Germans, Austrians. What did you do in the war, Daddy? What did you do? And how did the father cope with it? And that little clip I found fascinating. Look at this.
Growing up, I was surrounded by broken men drinking away their guilt over their participation in the most evil regime in history. Not all of them were rabid anti-Semites or Nazis. Many just went along, step by step, down the road. They were the people next door. Now, I've never shared this so publicly because it is a painful memory. But my father would come home drunk once or twice a week, and he would scream and hit us and scare my mother. I did not hold him totally responsible because our neighbor was doing the same thing to his family, and so was the next neighbor over. I heard it with my own ears and saw it with my own eyes. They were in physical pain from the shrapnel in their bodies and in emotional pain from what they saw or did.
Isn't that interesting? So it turns out that parents were participants in World War II. That's on the German side. So, okay, they came home, were guilty, not guilty. I don't know how they dealt with it. I don't care. But my point in general is coming to grips with the Holocaust was part of a general cultural trend, as I see it, caused by the painful realization that despite its terrible costs and destruction, the Second World War did not turn out to be the last war. It did not turn out to be the war to end all wars. It did not turn out to be the harbinger of a better world. Okay? Matter of fact, perhaps the opposite. Is this the future? Now imagine a parent who lost a child or something like that in the service in World War II. And they would like to be comforted, at least he died for a better world. And at a basic level, he did defend the USA, no question about it. But in a broad sense, did it bring Mashiach's side? Did it cause the end of all trouble? No. As a matter of fact, it called into question the entire narrative of modernity. If we went back 120 years ago, not to 1921 because that's the First World War, but if you went back to 1901, beginning of the 20th century, people thought, as Jules Verne, things are going to get better and better. They imagined the world, to use modern language, in which, yes, there was computers and all the modern technology, and there was no World War I or World War II and none of that stuff. And then everything would be gewaldic. And there'd be no more famine in the world, no more poverty. Science, technology, progress would save the world. And by the way, it is possible. Meaning, scientifically, physically, it's possible. We have enough food today to feed everybody, properly organized. There's nobody in the world today that needs to go without shoes. Right? The children in Africa do not need to starve. But it's very serious. Right? But it hasn't worked out that way. Instead, you got these terrible wars in third world countries. Africa is falling apart. Elsewhere. Why? Something's wrong. It was felt that modern science could deliver utopia. And the experience of the 20th century, particularly the Holocaust, proved that's not true. You can have scientific progress of the most unbelievable type side by side with the Holocaust, which used science to further its destructive ends. This throws the entire Western philosophy, the entire self-image of a progressive, continually progressive narrative, culture, out of whack. And no one's known what to do with it ever since. Indeed, in Europe, it has resulted philosophically in postmodernism, not modernism, which challenges the entire progressive narrative of Western culture. These are, until recently, the gods of philosophy in Europe, Derrida, Foucault, and the others. They question all fundamental reality, all the verities of the science world, because look what's happened. Look what's happened. In other words, in Western thought, the Holocaust emerged as the iconic representation of a utopia that not only failed to happen, but it was transformed into a dystopia with creeping totalitarianism just around the corner. Interestingly, the largest role in the Holocaust penetrating the mass consciousness of the public in the West was played not by historians, because their books are not read by the broad public. History books are read by a few. Let's go to the next one. There's Hilberg's famous book. He was the first one, Destruction of European Jewry. Most people didn't take it out of the library. It's not a fun read for the beach in Ocean City. It's only to read about gas chambers and things like that. So the historians did their job of getting the history books out there, but that's not what had to pack on the public. And I'm interested tonight, what is it that had a punch on the public? The broad public of hundreds of millions in Europe, America, and even elsewhere around the world. Although there's an entire story, let me put it this way. I'm not making fun of Hilberg, these other guys, because they had a hard time breaking through the prejudices of the history profession that it's okay to talk about the Holocaust. People didn't want to do that. There's an entire story of how difficult it was in the 50s and 60s to get historians to do the Holocaust. Especially Jewish historians were uncomfortable with the subject. I'm talking about Jews who were assimilated and somewhat ashamed of their own Jewishness, as is so often the case in old academia. Let's go to the next one. Again, I take you back to Hilberg, who was an atheist, okay? But he was a Jewish Jew. Look at this. After he turned, I'm going to show you how a guy like this in the late 40s decided to do, I say again, he's not religious, not particularly Jewish anyway, but he decided to devote his professional career to exploring the Holocaust. Now look at this. After returning to civilian life, this guy Hilberg, because he was in the service in the war, chose to study poli-sci, earning his Bachelor of Arts at Brooklyn College in 1948. He was deeply impressed by the importance of elites and bureaucracies. Okay. While attending Hans Rosenberg's lectures on the Prussian civil service. Hans Rosenberg was a famous German Jewish historian who ran away from Hitler, got a job teaching in New York. In 47, this is 2 years after the war, at one particular point in Rosenberg's course, Hilberg was taken aback when the teacher said the following. This is a Jewish teacher talking about modern history, European history. The teacher said, the most wicked atrocities perpetrated on a civilian population in modern times occurred during the Napoleonic occupation of Spain. I'll say it again. The most wicked atrocities perpetrated on a civilian population in modern era was when Napoleon was in Spain. Really? Aren't you overlooking something? That's the worst treatment of civilian population? The young Hilberg interrupted the lecture to ask why the recent murder of 6 million Jews didn't figure in Rosenberg's assessment. That kind of outdoes Napoleon. Rosenberg replied, it's a complicated matter, but the lectures only deal down to 1930. History doesn't reach down into the present age. That's a stupid answer. Okay? History doesn't deal in the present age. In 1947, the Holocaust is not part of history. Hilberg was amazed by this highly educated German Jewish immigrant passing over the genocide of European Jews in order to expound on Napoleon and the occupation of Spain. Moreover, he called, it was a kind of taboo topic in the Jewish community, and he pursued his research as kind of a protest against the silence. So I tell you, it's a guilty conscience and very great discomfort with the whole subject. Very different than today. Okay? That's what I'm trying to teach you here. We in America have tremendously changed in our outlooks from the 40s till today. Okay? Now, what captured the public, however, because the public doesn't read history books, what captured the public became part of the public consciousness. The public conscience and culture was not history books, but novels. I'm talking about novels that reached the broad public, not the numerous works written in Yiddish and Hebrew that were read by Jews and Jews alone. So a ton of stuff came out in the 40s and 50s and so forth in Yiddish, in Ivrit, in similar places. When I was very young, which was later than that, there were these books, How I Survived the World, nobody bought the books. I had an uncle who collected those things. That's how I saw those titles. Nobody ever bought those books. Okay? In connection with novels which got traction with non-Hebrew and non-Yiddish audiences, 3 names come to my mind as writing novels which gained mass readerships and literary status. Actually, 2 of them gained critical acclaim, which meant inclusion in university courses as must-reading, and the 3rd one attained massive middle-brow popularity. And it happened in the 70s and 80s, especially the 80s. Let us discuss this literary phenomenon. As far as I can tell, the first wave did not go into details of mass genocide, but something else. What do we remember from our distant youth? Which were the books about the Holocaust? Diary of Anne Frank. She doesn't talk about the Holocaust. As a matter of fact, the opposite. It's all about when she's hiding. Once she's caught, she doesn't write a diary anymore. It's a wonderful human story. It touched 1 million people. It was very effective. It's not about the Holocaust. You understand what I'm saying? It's not about the killing of 6 million Jews. Of course, she's a piece of that, but you know what I mean. What were the other books that were popular? Meal 18, The Wall. They talked about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And that's an important parsha. It's not about the Holocaust. Don't talk about the 6 million Jews. I mean, incidentally, he talks about it. You get it? These were the things that they thought, the writers thought, can capture the readership. People wanted to read, if anything at all, about the heroic stand of the Jews in Warsaw, which was heroic. But they didn't want to talk about the nitty-gritty of what Hitler did. They penetrated the book market, but they didn't tell the story of the people who went through the camps. Now, as I said before, there were out there a fair number of personal accounts by survivors, but they got no traction. Look, it's not light reading, and it wasn't brilliant writing either. And then came Elie Wiesel, okay, who, as you can see the years, Elie Wiesel, he brought the Holocaust into popular culture, in my opinion. Elie Wiesel is Hungarian, Romanian, but the part of during the war it was called Hungary, and in Mama Rush, and he was in the so just like all the Hungarian Jews, he was deported with his family in May of '44. So that means he had 11 months. right? From May of 44 to the liberation April 45. Not that long. Even one day is a hell, and a year was a hell. But that's what we're talking about, okay? Now, his father was killed, his parents were killed, he had a sibling or two survive. He was Zebrachan, as you might imagine, by the time the liberation came. But he was young. He was 20 years old, so he was the right age. He was, I guess, 17, 18 when the war was over. And he went to France to this youth thing where they tried to revive the Holocaust survivors in youth hostels and camps and things like that. And the long and the short of it is he got himself back together and ended up taking college courses in France and becoming eventually a journalist for the Israeli newspapers. So he was a journalist for the Israel papers in France. Fine, so he's a writer. But he's writing about politics and current events. In the early 50s, it was his idea. Other people said, you went through so much, and you're a writer. Write about your experiences in the Holocaust. And he did what others did. He wrote in Yiddish. And he wrote actually an 850-page book in Yiddish describing the hell in Auschwitz and all the rest of it. I'm sure there's plenty of it. It's called The Welt hat geschwiegen, the world was silent. Couldn't get it published. First of all, who's going to publish an 850-page book? Right? Second of all, who's going to publish an 850-page Yiddish book? And who's going to read it? And he couldn't get it published in Europe. Finally, got it published in Buenos Aires in Argentina, where they had a large Yiddish community at that time. But they say, you got to cut it down to 270 pages. I'm going somewhere with this. So he went from 850 pages to a Yiddish book of actually published of 270 pages. You have to cut out a lot. But then he met a Frenchman, Francois Mauriac, who was a very famous Catholic writer, and he said, you should describe your experience in French, and I'll help you. And again, the book publishers didn't want to publish it. It was a depressing subject. France had its own guilty conscience, but Francois Mauriac was, I think, a Nobel Prize winner, and therefore he was able to push it through. And it got cut to 170 pages. So you went from 850 to 270 to 170 in French, called Nuit, Night. Okay? La Nuit. And that's Mauriac on the right. So it hadn't been for Catholic, it wouldn't get published. In order to get it published in the English market, in 1960, again, he had a hard time finding a publisher. Isn't this funny? The publisher didn't want to deal with it. Jewish book reviewers and the book market was very heavily Jewish. Hannah Arendt, they said, we don't want to read this stuff. Right? Finally, he was able to do it if he cuts it to 100 pages. So from 850, he went to 100. Right? Now, you can just imagine what kind of detail you have to get rid of and what you have to replace it with. But you want to know something? They hit him over the head with a gold brick. A book of 100 pages, people will read. You follow? By doing it, they actually made it readable. Okay? And there it is, as you can see. And it's not easy reading. No, it's not. It is easy reading, actually. And it has a certain style, obviously. It started slow, but it built up and up and up and became a cult classic by the 1980s. Everybody's read around the world. It's translated in every language. Now, it's a novel, but it's clearly autobiographical, blurring the lines between history and fiction. So the historian will say, well, this part's not accurate, and the literary guy says to historical, doesn't matter, right? The public readership liked it, and the savagery of the experience of living under the Nazis, and the tortures in the concentration camp, and the unbelievable sadism and the evil comes through. The psychological scarring of the Jews comes through. Elie Wiesel ends the book and he says, I blame God. How could you let this happen? Kill my parents, all the rest of it. Where is God, Auschwitz? Totally understandable. Anybody can understand that. It's a Jewish trope. It's one of the Jewish responses to horror and tragedy. It's not the only one. Last week's Parsha, Moses himself says to God when he sees the Hebrews suffering in Egypt under the bricks and the straw, and he says, Lama harios lama zeh lama zeh shlachtani. Right? Hatzel or tzalta semecha. What have you done, God? Why, God, have you been so evil? Lama harios lama zeh, why are you so bad? And God answered him back. The meaning, Moshe didn't hesitate to say this is impossible to be a merciful God. On Tisha B'Av, you may recall possibly, we recite these kinos by eyewitnesses from the Crusades. And they're all full of these expressions. God, why are you asleep at the switch? I'm angry. Hachrishi mimeni v'adaber. Get off me, I'm going to say what I want to speak, even if I have claims against heaven. So, Elie Wiesel falls into that. And I'll say it again, anybody who went through Auschwitz, you have no kashas on them. He attained, therefore, not overnight, but soon, critical acclaim. I read it when I was a little kid because it was a thin book. Critical acclaim, a rock star status, and next thing you know, there's no business like Shoah business. And I don't mean that to be cynical. They turned into a multi-million operation. Nothing wrong with that. And so he became the face of the Shoah because any idea out there, as far as the mass public, has to have a face. There he is with all the presidents. It's Carter, it's Reagan, it's Bush, it's Clinton. It's look how buddy was with Obama there. Right? And if I'm leaving anybody out, and around the world, the prime ministers of England, heads of France, the European countries, he became the personification of the Shoah. His books were translated into every language. And for the first time in the broad public out there, I would argue, the Shoah became real. The person who takes that, as they say, for their vacation, then they're reading whatever, comes away and says, I read a 100-page book. Whoa. What the Jews went through, unbelievable. It's in the discussion already, you see? It becomes part of culture. And this, my friends, let's go, is the power of a novel. Right? A novel can get history across in a way that history books can't. Most people in the world forever have known about Napoleon's invasion of 1812 and the Russian campaign, all the rest of it, from War and Peace, not from reading history books. Right? They didn't read Germany and Colincourt and the others who gave the military details of Napoleon's campaigns in 1812. They read War and Peace, or they saw the movie, or they read the Cliff Notes. You understand? But this is it. Why? Because War and Peace, it's a novel. War and Peace captures that whole experience. And so do other great novels. I will think offhand of, what do you call it, the Clark Gable, what I'm thinking of, Gone with the Wind. That kind of thing, if you want to get the experience of what it's like, to be in the South when Sherman marches through. That kind of business. Now again, they're fiction, but they're so powerful that they get the historical reality across in the time. And that's what he does with the Holocaust. Elie Wiesel went on in the 60s and 70s and 80s and so forth to write many more novels. But I think the first one is the one that packed the punch. Now, I'm emphasizing the rock star thing because what I'm trying to describe tonight is how the Holocaust in our lifetime became a basic element of non-Jewish culture. You see, Elie Wiesel is out there with Obama. He's out there, with the president of France. He's out there with the writers in Germany and elsewhere. So these people are not Jewish. They are absorbing the experience of the Holocaust and admitting that the Jews went through a Holocaust via the persona of Elie Wiesel, of a novelist. Isn't that interesting? They didn't give any historians rock star status. They'll give a novelist. That's how culture works. Now, a second survivor, very important in Europe, less so in America, whose novels took off during this period was Primo Levi, who was an Italian Jew. This is very interesting. There are very few Italian Jews. Some were killed in the Holocaust. And Primo Levi, again, if you know the history, he's from Torino all the way up north. So the Germans, without boring you with the details, the Germans didn't get around to him till late 43, early 44. So he again spent about a year or so in Auschwitz. And a little less. He was lucky enough, if you want to call it that, he was lucky enough to be left behind in Auschwitz when the Russians arrived. So basically, the Holocaust was over for him in January of 45, when the Russian army went through. Like for Elie Wiesel, he was from Auschwitz, but they moved many of them into Germany. So for him, the hell went on January, February, March, April of 45. Now, Primo Levi, not religious at all, very little connection to Judaism, but he writes the Holocaust experience as a Jew and very European way. I myself don't like it, but many did. And all I can tell you, let's go to the next one. His novels, actually Homo This is a Man, which was made into a movie, and Survival in Auschwitz and many others, very popular. especially highbrow places in a European culture. In the end, he was so depressed by his experience in the war, he committed suicide. That's what it seems to be. Fell off, second, third floor, or something like that. I don't know, but I could totally hear it. Now, what is the impact of these novels, these writings? The utter victimhood of the Jews, because that's what we're talking about here. It's a black and white situation. The Jews were not a threat to Hitler. Somebody's grandmother, who was murdered in Auschwitz or somewhere else, was not a threat to the Germans. If they took the trouble to round up the grandmother and torture and kill her and gas her, it's the utter victimhood of the Jews, and therefore that means the utter evil of the Germans. So no nuance, right? No, you gotta understand, Hitler was under pressure, blah, blah, none of that. The Shoah emerges in Western culture as a result of these sorts of writings in clarity as a black and white issue. Man, so much so that I think you notice in Europe, Holocaust denial is criminalized. It's quite the place. The same Europe that persecuted the Jews for so many centuries, after the Holocaust, and more specifically after these kinds of novels, put the consciousness of the Holocaust into European thinking, got to the point that to deny this would be so evil that we criminalize the speech. Now, this is not true in the United States because we have a constitution, so you can say whatever you want. But it's just interesting, and I think some of you know this. Many countries, including Canada, I believe, their speech can be criminalized, and Holocaust denial is in the criminal category. Do you appreciate what I'm saying? Why can't somebody say this? Listen to me. I don't think it happened. That's my opinion. I don't think it happened. To do that is so bad. To do that is such a horror. Such a violence against Western tradition and truth that it makes you a criminal. This is remarkable. It provoked shame in Europe, the memories of the Holocaust, which is interesting because usually Europeans do not have shame. Remember, all this is happening during the Cold War. These novels and histories are blocked in the Iron Curtain countries. You couldn't read Elie Wiesel over there. But all that does is it results in the profound delegitimation of the communist regimes. The fact that the Russians deny the Holocaust, because that's essentially what they were doing. Yes, people were killed. They were Soviet citizens. Some were Jews. Many were not Jews. You know, the Russian way of telling lies. This provoked among the thinking people in the Eastern European countries a profound revulsion because you're lying. Let's go to the next one. Some may remember Yevgeny Evtushenko, the famous, he's not Jewish, famous Soviet poet, who wrote this famous thing about Babi Yar, in which he said, you know, where are you hiding it? Because the Soviet Union said, well, it's not true 33,000 Jews were killed in Babi Yar. 33,000 Soviet citizens were killed. Some of them were Jewish. Wrong, all were Jewish. They weren't killed, they were Soviet citizens. They're killed because they're Jews. They're killed by Hitler. And, here's somebody who's not Jewish who said, I can't stand the smell of these lies. Okay? Now, he was such a non-Jew that he didn't get in trouble for it. Though these Eastern European regimes are too obtuse to realize it, the radical delegitimation is what eventually took down the communist regimes in Eastern Europe. Isn't that true? Even dictatorships need some measure of legitimacy in the eyes of their citizenry. Brezhnev, even for his own people, and certainly around the world, became the face of moral obtuseness when you just simply say, there's no Holocaust, making something out is not true. Okay? Now, still, although the Holocaust was certainly entering American culture, as opposed to European culture, it had to do so, as I see it, in its own uniquely American way. Wiesel, Levy, and the others were not Americans, but Herman Wouk was. Herman Wouk was a uniquely American writer who wrote very famous books that were usually panned by the critics, but loved by the public. Okay? And when he wrote Marjorie Morningstar, about that Orthodox Jewish girl who has an affair and so forth in the 50s, the critics said it's terrible because at the end, Marjorie Morningstar marries a Jewish guy and becomes the head of Hadassah in a Long Island synagogue. It's not the way the novel's supposed to end. She had a fling. She's supposed to stay in Europe. And the critics all said it's terrible. The public ate it up. He got on the front page of Time magazine, and Eisenhower said it's my favorite book. Right? And Eisenhower even said it like this: I think to me, she's like the typical American late teenager going through the crisis of life. And he was writing about an Orthodox girl from Manhattan, you see? So this is just very interesting if you study the career of Herman Wouk. He was a very successful writer financially. He was always a very unsuccessful writer in terms of the critics in that group. Now, he certainly was unique in his Judaism, because Herman Wouk, whatever his early years, by the time he got to the 30s or so, his middle years, he said he was a Shomer Shabbos, Shomer Torah Mitzvahs. Here he is having a bottle of booze with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Okay, that's him on the side. You see the guy behind offering the bottle. Now, there are no major American novelists, I say again, major American Jewish novelists who are from. Okay? And he didn't wear it on his sleeve, but he didn't deny it either. There are no major American novelists other than him who are Orthodox practicing Jews. As an American, now by the way, he went through World War II. He was in the service in the United States Navy for 4 years in the Pacific. The American. But he also does Daf Yomi every day. Now, as an American, knowing the broad American public, he realizes a 100-page novel will not do justice to the utter magnitude of the Shoah, to its vast scale, and its radical evil, not the banal evil that Hannah Arendt said. She said Eichmann was a paper pusher. He was a bureaucrat, just signing orders, sending Jews to their deaths, 6 million of them. It was banal. He said, what are you, crazy? Eichmann was a monster. He was a devil. And in his book, Eichmann comes across as a devil. Now, I think, by the way, I think he hated her, so do I. When she was on the book review, she wouldn't let Night be published. You see? Hannah Arendt was this famous, brilliant intellectual, he said. To me, she's not brilliant at all. And like so many German Jewish intellectuals, she had serious issues with her Jewishness to an unbelievably ridiculous degree. I saw last night an interview in German that she had with the German TV. And they said to her, when did you know about the Holocaust? He said, well, it was sometime in late 43 we started hearing about it. Late 43? Right? Wait a minute. And we didn't believe it for 6 months. Because it didn't sound possible. You're German. You ran away from Hitler. You're supposed to know who the Nazis are. And you say, you couldn't imagine that the Nazis would be killing all the Jews of Europe as late as 1943 and early 44? And you're supposed to be the smart one? You blockhead? Anyhow, and he certainly wasn't, interested in the Jewish intellectuals who tried to reply to Hannah Arendt when she wrote that the Holocaust was part of the Jews' fault because the Unionats cooperated with the Germans. Anyway, Herman Wouk had none of that junk. Instead, now I'm going to tell you my opinion. This all happened in Hannah Arendt and all that stuff happened in the early 60s when the Eichmann trial, which was in 61, Eichmann was killed in 62. It was clear from there, a lot of people didn't understand what the Holocaust is, even smart intellectuals. At that time, Herman Wouk began a research project that took all the 60s, planning to write a gigantic War and Peace about the Holocaust in a way that would sell in the English language to the American public. So I think he did as a reaction to this Hannah Arendt business that I'm talking about and the reluctance of the American Jews to deal with the Holocaust and the ignorance of the American broad public, the non-Jewish public, simply what happened. And he's going to do it in his way by writing a gigantic novel, which will lay the whole thing out in a literary fashion. And he figured that's the best way to blow Hannah Arendt out of the water. That's what I think. And he did, because no one's heard of her. You just heard me mention her now. You never heard of her. Herman Wouk, a well-to-do author, because he was a millionaire from early books that he published and were successful, like this Marjorie Morningstar and the Caine Mutiny and his other stuff. So he was able to spend the 60s. He moved to Washington, D.C. That's why some remember him at Georgetown. And he spent years, all during the 60s, going around the world and researching, to get all the history necessary to make this novel happen. And the result was The Winds of War, which he published in 1971 during the Vietnam War, 800-page novel. Okay? Remember I told you before the Wiesel couldn't get it published in Yiddish? If you're Herman Wouk, you have the stature that you can get an 800-page book published. And it's a story of World War II. No, it's the first part of the story of World War II. Now, as I see it, he basically followed the Lanny Budd concept. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember. Used to have these, Upton Sinclair had this whole series in the 40s of Lanny Budd. He's the hero, and he's, to use modern terminology, it's like, what's the guy? Forrest Gump. But in a smart way, not a dumb way. He ends up being present in all these famous situations. He's with Roosevelt, he's with Churchill, he's with Stalin, he's with Hitler. He's at Dunkirk, he's at El Alamein, he's at Pearl Harbor, that kind of thing. And Upton Sinclair wrote they were very popular once upon a time, and then, of course, they fell out of popularity. I discovered it when I was in high school because Mr. Yanagar mentioned it to me, and I said, I never heard of it. There's a whole bunch of books on this. They're very well written. So he updated it, and his heroes are going to see everything in World War II. It's a novel. It intertwines the story, now listen closely, of an American Navy family, and Herman Wouk worshipped the American Navy. So it intertwines the story about an American Navy family with a Jewish family. The naval officer, while human, is the best of what you can call homus Americanus, the best of the American type. Honest, loyal, true, patriotic, properly liberal, not too much so, good father, that sort of thing. In other words, too good to be true. His hero, Pug Henry, is basically, to use modern terminology, the best of Donald Trump combined with the best of Biden. That's quite a statement. Now, the Jewish family in this story, well, their daughter marries this naval officer's son. So that's how he hooks the American public into the story. You understand? They're not too Jewish. He doesn't mind marrying someone out of the faith. And then they get caught up in the Holocaust. Now, here, in my opinion, is Wouk's genius. This was written during the Vietnam War, and Herman Wouk was showcasing the best of America, not the worst. The Jewish part of the story was turned into a piece of this heroic and tragic narrative, which we call World War II. And FDR and the U.S. military come out looking great. I emphasize this because, to the shock of the elite literary critics who panned the book, it was too stiff, the plot is undeveloped, it's too long at 800 pages, it's too much Jewish stuff in it. The American public, and I'm talking about the non-Jewish public, ate it up. And it was in the New York Times bestseller list for 172 months. Okay? So he obviously was onto something. It turns out the Hamon out there in America, Hamonam, was quite happy to plow through 800 pages after all. There's a famous thing I saw. The guy's a literary critic, and he was writing like this. He said, I'm writing this. I think it's a terrible book from a literary point of view, but I got to tell you something. I'm in a diner in Chicago, and I'm writing this, and we got all these waitresses around, and all the waitresses, in between the customers, they're pulling out and reading the paperback, Winds of War. You understand? The public likes it. And I can't overemphasize, let's go to the next one. As Michael Mandelbaum wrote in the Political Science Quarterly, since The Winds of War has been a bestseller, it is likely that more Americans have learned about or remembered the war through Herman Wouk's account than from any other single source in the last decade. So I'm just talking about a book here. In literary histories and that sort of thing, they don't like them, and they always push this stuff aside. From a sociological perspective, which is what I'm talking about, what did the public feel? And how did the American public react to this? It was gigantic, okay? And as I said before, in the center of the tale, teaching Americans about World War II, is the Holocaust. In my opinion, Herman Wouk wanted to win over a non-Jewish audience to a proper understanding of the Holocaust. And in the novel, as I said before, the Jewish girl marries a non-Jew, so that's the hook that draws people in. Now, by 800 pages, he was only up to Pearl Harbor. Okay? Therefore, he had to publish the second half, War and Remembrance. He spent another 7 years writing the second half of the book, which takes you, look at this, 1,100 pages. So the first book was 800 pages, second book was 1,100 pages. The critics say, are you crazy? Once again, the public ate it up. Yeah, people are not afraid of big books if it's well written. He's a good writer. Obviously. Right? So these all became bestsellers. It was devoured by the masses. And to tell you the truth, people went through the war. Henry Kissinger, who was not a member of the masses, said, this is the war itself. This is how it was. You see? This is how it was. So, the Holocaust, in all of its evil details, is a prominent part of the novel, although it's not the only theme, right? There's plenty in there. The main theme, you might say, one of the main themes is American patriotism. He takes you through all the battles. One of the characters gets killed at the Battle of Midway, and the other one's an admiral, and the other one's a this, and it's a D-Day, and it's FDR, and so on and so on, and such and such. There's plenty of American stuff in there, the Marines, and so on and so forth. The guy's son is a submarine commander in the Pacific. It's got all that stuff. But it also has, and by the way, the American Navy, the Navy, it's all about the naval victories and defeats in World War II. But it's also got the Jewish stuff, and it's intertwined there in very clever ways, very wise ways. A dose here, and the reader sees everything that Hitler did to the Jews. And also, by the way, in the subtle way of Orthodox Judaism, because the main Jewish guy, Aaron Jastrow, starts out as an apikoros, meaning someone who came from a Hasidic background who turned away from Judaism and embraced European culture. And then by the time the story's over and he's dying in a gas chamber, he's done 180 degrees and returned as a Baal Tshuva. He'll say the Shema in the gas chamber. And so it's the opposite of Elie Wiesel, where somebody religious becomes unreligious as a result of seeing the horrors. Here's somebody irreligious, in Herman Wouk's telling, becomes religious as a result of telling. And both happen in the war. But you surely wouldn't get that outcome reading from Philip Roth or some idiot like that. Now, since both of these books, which are really two halves of a big book, that's a 2,000-page business. I mean, let's put it this way. If you're taking that with you on your vacation, you're putting in some serious reading time. Such books were such gigantic successes in public sales that Hollywood started thinking of making a movie and a miniseries. Herman Wouk was willing to make millions, of course, but he insisted on total control, which is unheard of. He said, I'm not going to sell this unless I have complete control over everything. And they agreed. It's never been done before like that. When you have a novel and you sell it, the movie's not like the book. And he himself explained, Marjorie Morningstar in the movie's not like the book. But that's how it goes. It's understood. Books are books and movies are movies. At least I'm not having that. I don't want simply this to be a moneymaker, but I want to teach people about the theme of the book, and especially, in my opinion, when about the Holocaust. Not the sugar-coated way you see it elsewhere, but what really happened. Okay? Now, remarkably, he got what he wanted, and he got an unlimited budget. I'm telling you, if you read up this stuff, they poured tens and tens of millions of dollars when that was money back in the 80s. It was extraordinary. He wrote the miniseries. You get it? He wrote the what am I thinking of? The words, which is rare. He had a hand in picking the cast, which is weird because they picked all these old guys that they remembered from their youth. So everybody and all the actors are really 20 years older than supposed to be in the book. But it doesn't matter. When I say it doesn't matter, the public liked it anyway. And Pug Henry's supposed to be 50 years old and so on and so forth, a short, squat guy. Said they got Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum was Mr. America yesteryear. Okay? So he wants to get the American public on the side of the good guys and against Hitler. You see? And therefore, I'm just trying to make the point that I think Wouk was a brilliant propagandist. And then Mr. American guy. And that's what Herman Wouk wanted. And because you want to win the viewership of the TV show, of the movie, to your side in this story of history. Here's just like a little piece. I hope we'll be able to show this if YouTube will allow us on Motzi Shabbos by the time you see this, where the hero, Pug Henry, he's going to be the naval attaché to Berlin in 1939. He refuses to drink a toast to Hitler's birthday. and you see his stage presence. Just imagine if you're an American viewer watching the 1983 you say, that's an American.
Ladies and gentlemen, I propose a toast. A toast to Germany's great leader Adolf Hitler on his 50th birthday. And to his life's aim, peace. Der Führer!
You see the propaganda point. I think it's cool. I like to always analyze movies from the history perspective. Now, I told you Herman Wouk went and got total control. He wrote it. Clearly, one of his main goals was to show the unvarnished horror of the Holocaust. Now, in the first book, which was the first miniseries in 1983, as I said before, it only takes up to Pearl Harbor. The full Holocaust didn't happen yet, but the Holocaust by bullets happened, right? Talked about it in the past. That's when they went throughout Eastern Europe and just shot people in holes. There's one scene like that, and nothing like this ever shown on American TV before. This is prime time TV. They blocked away a whole week. Every night, this is when there was no cable, no internet. You only have 3 stations to watch in the good old America, and it's going to be hard to miss this show. And here you have, as part of his plot, of course, one of the examples of the Einsatzgruppen where they just shoot a bunch of people and look for the realism, even though everything here is fake. It's actors. Go ahead. Now, that's a light piece, and that's the only piece shown in the first series. Of course, it's not a light piece. It's not what you usually get on American television, right? Now what they show in the, and this is on prime time, like I said before. They just said, children be warned, and here we have it. Now, all I can tell you is, this series was a blockbuster success. Let's go to the next one. The greatest success in American history. The population in the United States at that time, 230 million. Who watched the show? 140 million. Every night, 80 million. Never had anything like this, right? And so what I'm trying to say is like this. Through the medium of a novel and of a TV, he brought the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, our version, into the mainstream of American culture, even though I don't think many critics realize this. Now, that was in 1983. I don't think the significance of being underestimated. So many people learned their history from this show. This was in 83 during the first Reagan administration. There's no question Ronald Reagan watched this. These were his friends. Next came the War in Remembrance, which covered the rest of the war from Pearl Harbor to the end of the war. In other words, those are the years of the full Shoah. Again, Herman Wouk, they made a second miniseries with $1 zillion. He wrote the script, determined to expose the full horror to the American viewing public on television. He got carte blanche once again. And he even got permission from the FCC to show nudity and atrocities, with actors, of course, which is unheard of. There are certain rules in the FCC that you can't show. He said, this is the Holocaust. And he said, okay. He said, I have to have naked people over here, because that's what happened in Auschwitz and these other places. And they said, there's nothing erotic about it. And they said, okay. So this is a unique event in the history of American TV at that time. Nowadays, we unfortunately live in a different world. I'm talking about the world of then, okay? Now, again, he got these old actors and all the rest of it, but it worked. And here, he shows, in the midst of the vast rest of the story, it's like a 30 or 40-hour series. See what I said? A 30 or 40-hour series. He shows the viewers, among other things, the full business of the Holocaust. I can't show all this to you now, but just to give you two ideas of things that are never, ever shown in other movies, certainly not in public TV and things like this. Just two pieces. One is, as you'll see in a second, what they did with the dead bodies after they shot all these people in graves. 2 years later, the Germans had them exhume them and rob the bodies of gold teeth and junk like that and burn the bodies, so if the Allies ever come, they shouldn't find them. Here, take a look at this. It's all actors, remember that.
SS Colonel Paul Blobel's Commando 1005 has become the custodian of the great and sacred Reich secret. Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler, privately beginning to fear that Germany might lose the war, is taking steps to preserve his nation's reputation. He has ordered that even the mute evidence of Germany's special measures against the Jews, the corpses, must not exist. And so Commando 1005 will open and clear all the mass graves throughout Poland and Russia, burn the bodies, shovel the ashes into the pits, level them off with dirt, and scatter them with grass seed. And in 5 years, the woods will obliterate every trace.
System. That's the thing, Weiser. System. Economic processing. These fellows search. These pull out dental gold and so on. These collect and inventory. System guys as system. And close supervision, or the yids will rub you blind. Just last week I had to shoot 7 perfectly healthy ones. And don't think they won't be missed on the workforce. Also, keep a close eye on your SS. 2 good men on the collection and alls.
You thought of everything, Herr Standartenführer.
Germany's war needs are great.
Yeah. Utter evil. This is not banality of paper pushers. You get that's a piece in many episodes. I'm only going to share one last one because my point is nothing like this was ever on TV before, and probably never has been since. Nobody cared to go through that level of detail. This even watched by millions of people, and it's like we had no idea it's going like this. Now, if you read the dense history books, you know if you're from G, you might possibly know a little bit more about this. Many don't. And here's a in form of a mini-series, you see, and a winning mini-series. Now, the climax is when the Jewish heroes get killed in the gas chambers. And he shows the whole business, okay? Now, I had to edit this very carefully to take out the, I don't want to be any unsneistic of scenes over here, but you see the men at least. You know this is what happened, that they stripped everybody and treated them with unbelievable cruelty. So I'm showing you a tiny little edited collection, a tiny little piece of what you can see in the full business in the movie. You imagine the American family bringing popcorn to the TV, the beer, and then all of a sudden this, they take a look.
Run it over.
Like I say, I'm not going to give you the whole business. See, I wouldn't even do to you what Herman Wouk did to you. See my point? And like I said before, all over America, people, families sit down, they said, kids get out of the room, adults get out of the room. You see? Now, this is primetime TV, right? Now, and there's a lot more. I just showed you a tiny piece. All I can tell you is, for Americans, they started to realize World War II was not Hogan's Heroes. It's not even funny. It's not even funny. Now, this turned out to be too much for the broad American audience. And the number of viewers, it's interesting to me, fell drastically from 80 million an episode to about 15 to 20 million an episode. Now, that's still a lot, but it's nowhere near. But Herman Wouk clearly wanted a record. He wanted a full depiction so that no one could really deny the full horror or deny how unbelievably evil, how unbelievably bad the Germans were. Okay? There's no nuance in any of this because there wasn't. Now, they had bad mazel with this miniseries. There was a strike and the cable TV came on this time and other things like that. Still, many millions watched it and many have since then in DVD form. Now it's on the Amazon, whatever you call it, since 1988. And when they do, as far as the movie can show, they're going to see what the Holocaust was like, what the Germans were like, what the FDR State Department was like, because he's got all that in there as part of the story. Now, Herman Wouk was careful to whitewash FDR. He comes across looking over here, because that, I think, would provoke the American audience too much, in my opinion. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the gold standard if you're interested in establishing a cinematographic record. On the other hand, it's not really what the American people like. It's not what they like. Who watched this? Steven Spielberg. He said, I'm going to do it in a way that I like. Now, Steven Spielberg is a complete different person. He's a genius, perhaps, as a movie guy, but he's a very complex relationship with Judaism. Let's put it that way. And but he said like this. He said, but I understand what the public will eat. Public will eat Schindler's List. And he made it 4 years later. Completely different type, okay? And focusing completely different way. And, of course, that was much more palatable to the American public for all kinds of reasons. You know, it concentrates on the good guy and all the rest of it. But I wanted tonight to share this with you to give credit to Herman Wouk, because his attitude was, let the truth be stated. Let the truth be stated, no matter how much it hurts. Let's get it out there once. Whatever happens to this afterwards, you can't say, if you watch my thing, you know what happened. This is what happened. Okay? So you see, my point is, how big an item the Holocaust was, the real Holocaust, and how much it had become such an essential part of American culture by the 1980s. Again, they pulled out all the stops for him. He got all the money he wanted. He got whatever budget he wanted. The FCC rolled over. The American public grew. It's remarkable. It's a very interesting thing, because people say like this. This happened, and someone has to put it out there. Then, the year later, came the fall of the Iron Curtain, which unleashed all kinds of stuff in connection with the Holocaust. But my friends, let's leave that for a future talk. I think I've spoken enough for tonight. And with that, I wish you a good tavach.